Louis II. In just one afternoon, the Sultan's forces completely obliterates the entire Hungarian army, and thousands of nobles die in the battle. The young king tries to escape the massacre, but he falls from his horse and drowns in a river. With Hungary's leadership and army crushed, Suleiman expected the territory to quickly fall right into his hands. But what happened next would change the course of the Sultan's life forever. See, while the Ottoman Empire was becoming the dominant power in the East, the House of Habsburg, through marriage, war, and a bit of luck, had become the most powerful family in Europe. By the 16th century, the Habsburgs controlled Austria, Spain, the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and one of them was even the Holy Roman Emperor. King Louis's queen was actually a Habsburg. Like I said, they were good at marrying for power. And so, when news of his death reached Europe, Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria, and Louis's brother-in-law rushed to Hungary and made himself the king. A Habsburg trying to claim Hungary didn't make the nobles there happy, and this split the kingdom in two. Royal Hungary in the north was controlled by Ferdinand and the Habsburgs, while the rest of the former kingdom was ruled indirectly by the Ottoman Empire through a puppet king. This arrangement was not what Suleiman wanted. He had hoped for total control of Hungary to use it as a staging ground to invade Europe, and so he attacks the home of the Habsburgs, Vienna. His siege of the city fails. Twice. And before he knows it, Suleiman finds himself locked in a decades-long personal war with the Habsburgs. The wars with the Habsburgs are on again, off again, but time after time, Suleiman is blocked from reaching Europe. He's now approaching his 60th birthday, and the Habsburgs are still preventing him from manifesting his destiny. He is running out of time, and so in 1552, after what he feels is a betrayal of a peace agreement, he sends two armies across the border into Royal Hungary to try again to inch his way towards Europe. After decades of constant war, the Ottoman army is a well-oiled fighting machine. In the blink of an eye, 25 Hungarian fortresses were taken by force. The Sultan's two armies are simply unstoppable, and they begin their march to their next target, a fortress on a hill that defended gold and silver mines that were essential to the Habsburgs' activity in Hungary. In early September of 1552, Captain István Dobó stands on the walls of Eger and watches as the day he had feared begins to materialize before his eyes. Dobó knew that it was only a matter of time before Suleiman arrived at his fortress and spent weeks begging Ferdinand to send reinforcements. He received no response. Dobó was left with a small force of professional soldiers and is forced to recruit peasants who had fled into his fortress walls for security. Just over 2,000 men is all he will have to try to defend this castle from 40,000 Ottoman troops. No matter, he now will only count on help from God. Dobó instructs those willing to fight that they will not surrender and instead defend Eger or die trying. Messengers from the Ottoman camp bring Dobó terms for a peaceful surrender. In response, the captain hangs a black coffin between two spears on the ramparts of the fort. The message is loud and clear, and the Ottoman siege of Eger begins on September 17th. Cannons rip into the fortress walls, and the Turks advance on the castle for 12 straight days. The peasant women who sought refuge in Eger with their families flint, sulfur, and oil and stuffs it into a giant water wheel. He lights the wheel and sends it hurtling directly towards the Turks as they approach the walls. The gunpowder ignites, and as the wheel barrels towards the attackers, it begins shooting off projectiles as it spins faster and faster, which douses the Ottoman army in flaming oil. I'm on fire! What kind of monster could come up with this? Now I'm on fire too! The battle continues for another week, and as bad as things seem for the defenders of Eger, things had gotten much worse for the Ottoman army outside. They did not expect this siege to take this long, and had now run out of ammunition. The two Turkish commanders had begun bickering over who was to blame for this disaster, and disease had also swept through their camp. Many of their soldiers no longer had the will to fight, and officers began resorting to pushing their men towards the walls at sword point. On October 17th, half of the battered Ottoman army leaves Eger, and the remaining army follows them the next day. An estimated 9,000 Ottoman soldiers died trying and failing to take the fortress. Against all odds, Commander Dobó and his ragtag group of 2,000 soldiers, farmers, and women had just handed the Ottoman Empire their first defeat in their war against the Habsburgs, and he becomes a national hero in Hungary for leading one of the only defensive last stands in history that actually won. Battle of Cameron. For most history fans, the American Civil War is probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think about the 1860s. But did you know that at the very same time, just south, the French were conducting a full-scale invasion of Mexico, and it was actually in this conflict that one of the greatest last stands in history took place. It's 1861, and the Emperor of France, Napoleon III, feels he has just come up with the perfect plan to grow his empire. At the time, the Civil War was raging in the United States, and with the Americans busy killing each other, Napoleon thought this might be the perfect time to test that pesky Monroe Doctrine, a treaty that prohibited European states from messing around in the Americas. And just as luck would have it, Mexico had just given him the perfect opportunity to do just that. See, the Mexicans had just come out of their own civil war that nearly bankrupted them. They owed a ton of money to Europe, and being broke, the new government had stopped paying their loans. This was no bueno to Europe, and so Spain, the UK, and France each sent troops to Mexico in December of 1861 to get their money back. The UK and Spain quickly reach an agreement with the Mexicans and head back to Europe. But France, on the other hand, begins to send more troops to Mexico, and it quickly becomes clear to everyone that Napoleon's goals aren't just collecting overdue debts. This was an old-school imperial invasion. Tensions continue to escalate as more and more French troops land in Mexico, and in 1862, 6,500 of Napoleon's imperial army begin a march towards Mexico City. The Mexicans scramble soldiers and militia to defend their capital, and skirmishes break out en route. The Mexicans fight valiantly, but the French push them back at every battle and seem unstoppable. But on May 5, 1862, the Mexicans again try to stop the French army as they enter the town of Puebla, and though they're outnumbered, they manage to beat them back for the first time. This victory proved the Mexicans could go toe-to-toe with one of the greatest armies in Europe, and in fact is still celebrated unknowingly by Americans across the country to this day as Cinco de Mayo. But anyways, when news of the defeat at the Battle of Puebla reaches Napoleon, he's equally humiliated and enraged. He orders 20,000 more troops to be deployed to stamp out the Mexican resistance, and by 1863, the French have nearly 30,000 soldiers in Mexico, and amongst the reinforcements were a small band of soldiers from the French Foreign Legion. Made up exclusively of refugees, criminals, and ex-mercenaries whom Napoleon wanted to get out of Paris, the Foreign Legion was a real kill two birds with one stone idea. Deploying these burdens on society to fight battles far away from France would not only clean up his streets, but also give his generals some cannon fodder to send into the most dangerous places. Unexpectedly, the Legionnaires had proven themselves as fierce fighters in the Algerian campaign, but despite their bravery, they were still considered to be low-class soldiers. Useful, but ultimately expendable. Little did anyone know that this reputation would soon be changed forever as the French began their second attempt to avenge their most embarrassing defeat in Mexico. On March 16, 1863, the French attack Puebla a second time and lay siege to the town. Cannons rip apart buildings, and the Mexicans are forced to abandon their initial defensive positions. But what was supposed to be a quick victory earned through shock and awe drags on as the Mexicans raise barricades on every street and force the French to fight house to house. By the end of April, the French were running low on ammunition. As they near the hacienda, 800 Mexican cavalrymen emerge ahead of them, and they quickly charge the Legionnaires. Danjou orders his men to form a hollow square, and firing in volleys, they manage to push back the cavalry charges twice while continuing to retreat to the farmhouse. The Mexicans continue to chase them, and 16 of Danjou's men are captured. The remaining 49 Legionnaires manage to make it inside the hacienda, but Mexican forces soon arrive and completely surround them. Danjou realizes they are trapped, and the chances of survival are grim. But maybe they can stall the Mexicans just long enough for the supply convoy to slip away and reach Puebla. Danjou watches as more and more Mexican troops gather outside the compound. He takes a deep breath and turns to his men. He holds out his hand, a wooden one that replaced the one he'd lost fighting for the Legion, and asks them to swear on it that they will all fight to the death rather than surrender. The men pledge their lives to their captain, who then opens a bottle of wine, and together they share one last drink. The Mexican commander soon sends in a negotiator, and he asks Danjou to surrender, stating that if they resist, they'll be needlessly slaughtered. The captain answers back that he and his men have plenty of ammunition, and instead they will continue to fight. Bewildered, the negotiator returns to his commanding officer with the news, and at 11 a.m., the Mexicans storm the compound. The Legionnaires fire round after round into the hostile crowd, who are quick to return fire as they storm the hacienda. In the firefight, Danjou is hit and soon dies from his wound. Casualties quickly begin to pile up on both sides, but more Mexican reinforcements arrive at Camarón, bringing their numbers to over 2,000 men. The negotiator again tries to get the Legionnaires to surrender, but the only response he gets is from a sergeant stationed on a roof. "Go to hell!" In response, the Mexicans breach the walls of the hacienda, and firefights break out throughout the courtyard. The Legionnaires continue to fight, but by 5 p.m., only 12 of them remain standing. The Mexicans withdraw from the compound and give the French one last chance to surrender. This offer is met with complete silence. At 5:30 p.m., the Mexican forces launch a final charge, and within an hour, all that's left of Danjou's men are a lieutenant and 4 soldiers who find themselves trapped in a small storehouse. As the men watch Mexicans approach their position, they fire their last rounds and begin to affix their bayonets to their rifles. The lieutenant gives the command, and the last of the legionnaires erupt from the shed. On sight, the Mexicans open fire. The lieutenant and a soldier who had jumped in front of him trying to protect him are instantly gunned down. The 3 remaining men are quickly surrounded, and guns are trained on them from every direction. A Mexican officer shouts orders not to fire and begs for the legionnaires to surrender. The men look at each other and finally agree upon the condition that they can keep their weapons and their lieutenant be given immediate medical care. The officer takes the 3 remaining legionnaires to his colonel, and the Mexican commander cannot believe his eyes. Is this all of them? Is this all of the men who are left? These are not men. They are demons. Outnumbered 40-1, the 65 soldiers under the command of Captain Danjou had killed 300 Mexican soldiers and wounded another 500. Tales of the Battle of Cameroon spread throughout Europe, and the reputation of the French Foreign Legion changed as a small band of 1,500 Swiss soldiers wade through the river directly towards them and begin to form 3 pike squares. The mismatch is ridiculously obvious for everyone there. The French outnumber the Swiss 20-1. This is going to be a massacre. But before they can figure out what's going on, the Swiss begin charging at them in formation. The Dauphin is startled, but he quickly orders a cavalry charge. The Swiss are brave, but they can't possibly... Oh my God, we are dying! Against overwhelming odds, the Swiss maintain formation and fight off these charges again and again. Soon, the cavalry is pushed back, and the Swiss find themselves within striking distance of the main French army. The Dauphin quickly orders his crossbowmen to fire at the Swiss to finish them off. On command, thousands of bolts are sent hurtling across the battlefield directly into the advancing formations. But as they lower their weapons, the French watch in horror as the Swiss simply rip the bloody bolts from their bodies and continue to march forward undeterred. As they draw nearer, the French can see that some of these soldiers had lost their hands while fighting off the cavalry charges, yet they continued marching forward in formation using their bloody stumps to hold their weapons. Now in range, the Swiss pike squares charge at full speed, and brutal melee combat erupts as the forces clash. The battle rages on for a few hours, with soldiers on both sides falling at a rapid pace. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Swiss fight without fear. But eventually, the sheer numbers of the French army begin to collapse their formations, and they're forced to retreat to a small hospital called St. Jacob. The French roll out cannons and open fire on the hospital. Within hours, the building is a smoking pile of rubble. The Dauphin sends Burkhard VII Munch, a Swiss noble who had sided with Zurich against the Confederation, to broker a surrender with any remaining survivors. As Munch rides his horse through the ruins of the building, he sees the broken bodies of hundreds of Swiss soldiers strewn about the floor. He raises his visor, and as he looks at the bloodied men lying all around him, he mockingly says, "I gaze upon a rose garden that my ancestors planted 100 years ago. Here, eat one of the roses." This actually happened, and he died 3 days later from that. Anyways, after the failed negotiation, the French army storms the hospital. The remaining Swiss soldiers fight to the end in a valiant but ultimately doomed last stand. Just 16 of the Swiss pikemen survived the final battle. They never surrendered, but instead were so injured that they were mistakenly piled with the other dead bodies and were later discovered alive. Though they were defeated, the small unit of crazy Swiss psychopaths managed to kill 3,000 French soldiers, and this made the Dauphin not super excited to fight the real Swiss army that was waiting for them. Not wanting no smoke, he decides to turn his army around and head back to France, where they sign a peace treaty with the Swiss Confederacy shortly after. Word of the Battle of St. Jacob an der Burs quickly spreads throughout the land, and the Swiss earn the reputation of being the most fearless soldiers in all of Europe. So much so that they're eventually hired by the Pope to defend the Vatican, and they continue to do so until this very day.